Hi and welcome to Lecture 9. In this lecture we talk about active record built-in validations as well as how to write a custom validation. So first of all, what is a validation and what is the purpose? So preferably you would want to have some control over what goes into the database. Not every input is appropriate to go into the database. And you want to have a validation that validates whether the input is valid or not, and if it's not valid, it should not be saved to the database. Active Record provides a whole bunch of built-in validators. For example, presence and uniqueness. You could say presence true, which makes sure that that column or a list of columns have some data in them. Or for example, uniqueness. Uniqueness makes sure that the record that you're trying to save to the database, a column in that record is unique and doesn't already exist in that database table. So for example, let's try to enforce that a job record, when it's being saved to the jobs table, has data for the title and the company fields. So we're going to do validates, note the S at the end, and validates title company, which are just a list of fields, and then the last argument to the method is a hash, which in this case only has one key value pair, which is a presence, and true, which is a presence validator. So when we create a job but doesn't have any data in it, completely blank. Now if you call errors at this point, there's really nothing wrong with this job yet because you haven't really tried to save it to the database and the validation hasn't been performed. But as soon as you try to save it to the database by saying job.save, and you'll get false because it won't be able to save it to the database, you could see that there are errors which you could call on this record, and it will show you what the errors are, and you could even say job.errors.full messages, which will give you an array of all the errors that currently exist that are preventing this object from being saved to a database. And as you can imagine, this is a very useful information to have to show a user, maybe on the web page, why he wasn't able to save the information to the database as he was expecting to. Other common validators is, for example, numericality. It validates numeric input of a field. Or length, maybe you want the field to be a certain length. Or format, maybe you want it to comply to a certain regular expression. Or inclusion, maybe you want it to be one of a list of things that are allowed and everything else is not allowed. Or the opposite, you want to validate that the value is out of a specified range, and you provide that range as part of your exclusion validator. Now, if none of these fit your needs, you could always write your own validator. And the way you do that is you have to write a method that does some validation, and then as part of that validation calls this errors.add with a column name and error, as we're going to see in a minute. And then you specify it as a symbol to the validate method. Now note, in this case, it's not validates with an S, but just validate. So for example, we want to make sure that the salary range, the min range, is always going to be less than the max range, because obviously it's silly to be saving a record to the database where the min range is, the min value is greater than the max value. Now, just as an aside, numericality validator already provides this behavior with some options that you could specify, but just to show you how it's done, if you were to write it yourself as a custom validator, this is how it's done. So you do validate, you specify this method that you're about to write as a symbol, so validate basically is going to call this method before it saves information to the database. And all you do in this method is you say if min salary is greater than the max salary, then you want to add this error to the list of existing errors in your active record. So basically you would do if min salary is greater than max salary, errors add min salary, which is a symbol or a column in your table, and this is the actual error description, cannot be greater than the maximum salary. So now, if you try to create a record in the database, and remember that create actually right away tries to create the record in the database, you're gonna see that the record was not created. You could see that because the ID is nil, the transaction was rolled back, and you could see that there are errors here, and you could see what the errors are, array of errors, which in this case you just have one, that min salary cannot be greater than the maximum salary. If you do sr.save with a bang, with an exclamation, that actually throws an exception. So similar to how create with an exclamation throws an exception, instead of just returning false. So save without the exclamation returns false, but save with an exclamation actually throws an exception. So in this case, it's going to tell you that active record invalid, validation failed, and the issue with the validation is that min salary cannot be greater than the maximum salary. So in summary, validations give you control over what goes into the database, and we're getting close to the end of our coverage of active record, so I just wanted to share some links to the guides where a lot of this information is found. So if you ever have a question about something, you could always look this up. So there's the active record basics, the active record querying, associations, and callbacks are the things that we covered so far.